This video is part of How to Listen to Music's Music Fundamental series. This series is intended to help you uncover the power of music by learning how it works. This video is about pitch. What is musical pitch? Well, simply put, it's how high or low a note is. Easy, but it's the labeling and how we write it down that makes it more complicated. Let's start with some physics. Frequency is the term that describes how frequently a repeating event occurs in a certain amount of time. As musicians, we're interested in how often a physical object oscillates or vibrates, i.e. moves back and forth rapidly, to make a sound. All sound is produced by oscillation. Whether you're twanging an elastic band, plucking a guitar string, creating friction between the bow of a double bass knit string, striking a drum, using your mouth muscles, i.e. your embouchure, to vibrate your lips and blow down a trombone, controlling clarinet or oboe reeds, or air to vibrate in a flute. It's all something oscillating, something vibrating back and forth to create sound. When an object oscillates, it creates compressions and rarefactions in the air, or bands of higher and lower pressure that result in noises. Here's a watch, oscillating back and forth but not very quickly, so it has very little effect on the air around it. In other words, its oscillation isn't making any noise. If we wanted to make a picture of the path of this watch as it oscillates, it might look like this. Then, let's say we track the path it makes over time. Let's turn this graph on its side and show time moving from left to right. If this watch moves from its starting point and completes a cycle, i.e. it gets back to where it started, the path will look like this. If an object completes that cycle in 1 second, we would have measured 1 Hertz, the standard unit of frequency. 1 Hertz, named after Heinrich Rudolf Hertz, means 1 cycle in 1 second, or 1 cycle per second. If we increase the number of cycles per second, let's say to 440, we hear this sound. We can say its frequency is 440 Hertz. If we zoom in, we see the same shape wave as we drew from tracking the oscillating path of the watch over time. This particular wave shape is called a sine wave and produces this unique soft ooh sound. We have to zoom in to see it because to produce this particular pitch, it has to complete a cycle 440 times every second. And the higher the frequency, the higher the sound. So musical pitch can be described with a number, a frequency measured in hertz, which means that sound is produced by something oscillating 440 times a second. But as fascinating as the science is, it typically isn't how musicians talk with each other about pitch. Enter letter names, specifically the English alphabet. Let's take this note at 440 hertz. This note is the one modern orchestras use to tune before the conductor walks out on stage and receives tremendous applause before they've done anything. It's typically played by the oboe. 440 hertz has a letter name. It's A. In the English-speaking world, we use the first 7 letters of the English alphabet to name musical notes, A through G. Let's use the piano keyboard to visualize this. A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. There are more than 7 notes, of course, and we can repeat the pattern if we continue our ascent. Quick pause. By ascent, I mean go up or get higher. What's getting higher is the pitch of the note. On the piano, higher notes are found further to the right, lower notes further to the left. Back to our pattern. The next note up in the pattern after G is again A, and we begin again and keep going up, ascending, until we hit the highest end of an instrument's range, the highest note an instrument can play, we can sing or we can hear. If we descend, go down, the pattern works in reverse. Our alphabet goes backwards, so G, F, E, D, C, B, A. Once we hit A, the next note down is G. So far, we've just dealt with those 7 letters, and, incidentally, only the white keys on the piano. Before we get into details of the black keys, notice their grouping. They're grouped in 2s and 3s. This helps us navigate our way around the keyboard. This is the A we mentioned earlier. It's between the middle and 3rd black key of the group of 3 black keys. Whether we ascend or descend, we'll always find an A in the same place between the middle and third black key of the group of 3 black keys. And it's the same with any other letter name. In other words, every key has a letter name which is determined by the pattern or grouping of white and black keys. So let's connect this back to frequency and the letter A. We had said this key, which is A, is 440 Hz. As we move to the right on the keyboard, we hear the frequency and pitch get higher. When we get to the next A, you can hear the note is higher, and see from the Hertz written above the keys that the frequency has doubled. If we move down the keyboard to the A below, we can hear and see the frequency has halved. The same is true for other notes too. For example, if you move from one C down to the next C, the frequency is halved. Going up from C to the next C means the frequency is doubled. In this case, it means whatever is vibrating or oscillating to cause the sound of the higher note is oscillating twice as much every second than what's producing the lower C. Or, to think about it the other way round, the oscillating object producing the lower C is oscillating half as much as the oscillating object that's producing the higher C. Got it? I know this is super interesting, but it's not especially practical for musicians, and you'd be right. However, understanding this helps us understand how the speed with which an object oscillates and the idea of sound are related. Continuing down this path and learning about how we hear is also super interesting, and very much related to this, but it's beyond the scope of this video. I'll post links at the end for budding audiologists. Something else worth investigating, but we won't have time to cover here, is the difference between types of tuning. You may or may not have heard about equal and well-tempered tuning. There are several videos on YouTube that do an excellent job of explaining it. I'll post links at the end. And there's a very interesting book by Stuart Isikoff called Temperament: How Music Became a Battleground for the Great Minds of Western Civilization. It's really more a college level and up book. And I read it a few years ago, and it's fascinating. I recommend putting it on your wish list. But to briefly explain the difference between equal and well-tempered tuning, there exist different ways to tune instruments and play the notes between an A and the next A. That's all I'll say right now without going down a rabbit hole. So the English alphabet is one way musicians talk about pitch. The French use their own names, which may be familiar to you: Do or ut, Ré, Mi, Fa, Sol, La, and Si. Just like the English letters, there are 7, and they work exactly the same way. Ascending is Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La, Si, and then we repeat Do. Descending is reverse: Do, Si, La, So, Fa, Mi, Re, Do. Do is the same as Si in English notation. However, this notation was transformed into a system to learn sight singing, i.e. reading a piece of music and singing it as you see it, by Sarah Anna Glover, a music educator from Norwich in England in the 18th century. With this system, Do is not fixed to the pitch C, but moved around to represent the keynote or tonic. More on those terms in an upcoming video on harmony. This is called movable Do, because, frankly, you move it. With movable Do, any note, not just C, could be considered Do or the keynote. If you know something about sight singing, you probably know how useful that can be. As we take a quick tour around Europe, the Italians use pretty much the same system as the French, except Do is always Do, not ut. The Germans and Scandinavians use the same alphabet the English do, except English B is called H, and the English B flat is B. There are a couple of theories about this, which I'll elegantly sidestep here, but by all means share your doctoral thesis on this in the comments. This brings me to the amazing music and musical systems of China, Japan, Indonesia, India, and other countries who have long and glorious musical traditions. I'm afraid you'll have to do your own research, though. It's not my specialty, and I urge you to listen to and learn as much about this wonderful music as possible. As we're on the subject of pitch, you may have heard the term perfect pitch or absolute pitch. This refers to an ability a person has to identify a pitch just from hearing it and without reference to another note. So if you said sing a C to a person with perfect pitch, they could do it. They could also identify a note you played just from hearing it. It's pretty impressive. I've known a few people with perfect pitch, and it's always a source of entertainment to me to watch them react when someone's not hitting the right note. They don't usually keep a poker face when that happens. I've seen estimations that between 1 to 5 people in every 10,000 people have perfect pitch. It's generally considered that perfect pitch is genetic, at least in part, but there are studies that show it's possible to train people to have perfect pitch. For the rest of us, developing good relative pitch is essential. That means if you hear a note, you can sing, play, or identify another note. I'm including this phrase because I've heard it used, admittedly not so much anymore, to mean out of tune. The first time I heard it was out of the mouth of the legendary bassist and music producer Randy Jackson in another role of his, a judge on an early season of American Idol. If you're watching this video and American Idol is no longer on TV, please feel free to message me and ask about American Idol. I'll keep my thoughts out of this video. So we understand the phrase to mean out of tune. In other words, the notes that were sung were either a little too high or a little too low in relation to each other. I don't like the phrase because it can lead to confusion, and there's plenty to be confused about in music already. To me, the confusion can come from the idea that notes can be a bit pitchy. But the quality of pitch is in every note, whether or not they're the correct pitch. But maybe I'm being too literal or pedantic. Anyway, we'll move on. You're probably aware that some instruments produce identifiable pitches and others, especially in the percussion family, don't. String instruments, brass, woodwind, singers, often, and the piano, a percussive instrument in nature because the hammers inside strike the strings to produce pitches, largely produce identifiable pitches. Many percussion instruments do too. The xylophone, marimba, vibraphone, glockenspiel, i.e. the ones that are organized like a keyboard, also produce identifiable pitches. The timpani are tuned to produce specific notes too. All of these can produce sounds of indefinite pitch as well, and many contemporary composers have demanded traditional instruments be used in new and exciting ways to produce sounds that composers like Mozart or Amy Beach wouldn't have asked for. Typically, when we talk about indefinite pitch, we think of percussion instruments like the snare drum, cymbals, and claves. We hear them produce sounds but not individual pitches. In other words, we can't sing or play their pitch on the piano. These instruments are generally referred to as unpitched percussion. They can produce high or low sounds that are usually a range of pitches, so no single pitch stands out. Sometimes they do produce a pitch, but the pitch they produce doesn't relate to or fit with what the rest of the group is playing, so it's not heard as a single pitch. So that's a summary of the concept of pitch. Hopefully you've grasped the basics, know how to describe pitch in scientific as well as musical terms, and you can say that's out of tune instead of that's a bit pitchy. Please post questions and comments below, subscribe to the channel, check out the other featured channels, follow me on TikTok, how to listen to music, and whatever you do, keep listening to music.